Hello, and welcome to another episode of me, Robert McIver, playing Braid. Hello, Rusted. It's good to see you again. Last episode, 2 days ago, we done all of this. What was it called? Graphics, artwork. We done all of that, and now today we're going to do another topic. Haven't decided. Either music or programming. Play by ear. Let's get straight into it. Cool. Alright, cool. Where are we? How you been, Mustard? What you been up to? Oh, you've got another piece here as well that we got last episode, so let's put this in. Yeah, I suppose that goes in. We done design, we done visuals. Let's do programming. This area directs you towards commentaries related to programming. Many, but not all of these are available via other routes through the commentary, but they are gathered here for convenience. We've done a few already. I remember checking out this room before. Alright, using markers to trigger events in a backwards time system of World 1.
Once I had decided on the basic way this world works, the player would go forward in time, while all the gameplay objects would go backward in time of their own accord. There remained a big question about how to make this actually happen in the code. Since the gameplay engine of Braid is all about recording the history of objects and playing them back later on, the most obvious idea is to use that same code just to make everything go backwards. During development time, you would set up a level with monsters and whatever else, and you just let it play with time going forward and record the history of that, just like we do for normal rewinding. Then, when someone is actually playing the game, you load that recorded history and play it backward, and the player is just exempted from that rewind and simulates forward normally. This was the first thing I thought of, and immediately I felt it just wouldn't be very good, because you'd never be able to affect any of the objects because those objects could only do what was pre-recorded. If you couldn't affect anything, it seems the game design would become monotonous, and all the levels would just be about bouncing off invulnerable monsters, or whatever. I wanted at least some reverse causality, for example, jump on a dead monster to make it alive. This brings a little bit of magic into the dynamics of that world, and allows there to be cause and effect for something besides the player. Now, there might be ways to do this by pre-recording everything. For example, you could record multiple histories and branch between them based on the player's actions. This would use a much larger amount of memory. It would be very messy and hard to program, and it would constrain possible player actions only to the places that were pre-computed during development time. This constraint might prevent you from designing what you really want to design. The much more appealing alternative was to make a way for monsters and gameplay objects to somehow simulate themselves backward from moment to moment in the same way that they go forward. Monsters would undie and unfall. Figuring out when monsters should undie is not too hard. Clearly, it's when the player is bouncing off them. But when should they unfall, and how does the game know when and where they started falling so they can simulate back to that point? There are a few different ways to do all this. The solution I implemented does involve simulating the level forward at development time, like the pre-recording idea would have. But instead of recording the history of all the objects, I added some special code that creates invisible markers wherever major events happen. For example, when a monster hits a surface and bounces off, we create a marker and also record the velocity at which the monster had been traveling when it hit the floor. We save those markers with the rest of the level, and now when the monsters are walking backwards, there are indicators of where they should unbounce from their fall and then unfall upward. And at some point up in space near the ledge is a marker that says, if a falling monster passes through this space, it should land here. The idea is that during gameplay, we just simulate monsters backwards. So if a monster is alive, he walks backward, and if he hits a marker, we make something special happen. Here are the bounce markers on this level. Each marker says, hey monster, if you get here, launch yourself upward with some particular velocity, the negative velocity of the one we recorded when playing time forward. As long as the monster did not fall far enough to reach terminal velocity, then this should launch the monster back up to exactly the place where it fell off the platform. In reality, because of small inaccuracies in the way the game is simulated, these markers did not reproduce the motion perfectly backward, and I had to tweak the results by hand at least a little bit. There's another kind of marker up here on the cannon that says if a monster ends up inside this cannon, make it disappear. Also make the cannon fuse start unburning. We also need to start playing the sound effect for the cannon shot from the end and going backwards so that it finishes just when the cannon would fire. This is accomplished with more markers. When playing the level forward in developer mode, when sound effects finish playing, we put markers wherever the current monster is, so that during gameplay, when time is going backwards, we know when to start the sound effect. In other words, the cannons are not firing based on time, but based on the monster's position. This jump to revive situation becomes a little weird, because what happens when you aren't jumping, but you're just standing there, and the monster comes up to meet your feet? If we're keeping with a strict interpretation of the rules of the game, maybe what should happen is that the monster just stays dead and keeps falling upward past you, because you couldn't have killed the monster if you weren't jumping. So, to unkill a monster, if we're being strict, you would have to jump into the air right above the dead monster's head at just the right time, such that it would be plausible you had bounced off it. But if the game were this picky, this might make levels extremely hard, and it might be really annoying to play. Hitting the monsters, unfalling quickly up the screen, would require difficult timing because the monster is moving very quickly and you can't see it coming because you need to hit it near the bottom of the screen where you're standing. And if the player isn't even sure that this is the right way to solve the puzzle, the difficulty in execution adds ambiguity. is this the wrong answer, or am I just failing to do it properly, is not something you want players to be confused about in a puzzle game. So, I made the judgment call that just standing on a dead monster would revive it, but pop you into the air in a jump. So in reverse, it looks somewhat like jumping on a monster to kill it, it's just that the positioning is slightly awkward. If I were designing the game again with the experience I have now, I might try harder to remove this standing bounce and make it workable that we require the player to jump. For example, I might redesign the level so that you can see further down below the playable area to see the dead monster coming up, which itself would be suggestive that you should jump on it. And I'd try to somehow hint the jump in other ways, but doing a good job would require changes elsewhere in the game. For example, if we let you see very far below the play area so that you could time the jump, it would feel very out of place compared to the rest of the game, where the floor is always near the bottom of the screen. There is at least one level where portions of the play area are pretty high up the screen, the pit, but that's because we want to make room for the pit itself. Not much play happens on the higher part of the level, which is off to the sides, and the rest of the game still sets the expectation that the ground is low down. One way to make this more natural would be to make another level earlier in the game that also has a high floor, and then have this level be a reprise of that one. Reprises are something we do a lot in the game already, but it's not easy to add more levels into a game that has a fixed number of puzzle pieces per world. Which other puzzle piece do I remove to make room for this one? And how do we make that level interesting? In order for it to feel good, the puzzle would have to have something to do with the ground being high up. But the gameplay excuse for this can't be reverse time because that doesn't happen until later in the game. So what could it be? It's just not easy to be a picky game designer. When confronted with the fact that reversal didn't work perfectly, so that monsters flung into the air by these markers did not reach exactly the place they came from when recording the markers, the ideal thing to do would have been to keep working on the simulation code until the reversal worked perfectly. But when you're overwhelmed by the number of things to do to finish a game, and the simulation code is already pretty complicated because it has to support all kinds of different rules from all the different worlds, it can seem much more appealing just to do the quick fix. And tactically, this is often the right solution in terms of actually finishing the game. Especially back when Braid was made, lots of independent games would fail because the authors just got overwhelmed by how much work there was to do, so the games never got finished. I was very, very mindful of this and wanted to finish the game at all costs. The downside of a quick fix is that the imperfect reversal could be a symptom of some much deeper problem that is affecting other parts of the game in a negative way. And by doing a quick fix, rather than investigating and fixing the deeper problem, we could be causing big bugs elsewhere. Maybe rare bugs that we would not catch in testing, but that would cause bad experiences for a significant number of players. Many other games have had exactly this kind of problem. On the other hand, the imperfect reproduction of the markers could be a simple issue that affects only the World 1 levels, like a simple dependency on the order in which we update velocity and position. I chose not to open that potential rat's nest and just do the easy hand tweaking and work towards shipping the game. And maybe this was the right choice because the game did get finished. So, you were asking, what about it didn't reverse correctly?
And how did you tweak it by hand?
And how did I tweak it by hand? Oh, let's do the latter part. So how I tweaked it was very unscientifically because, there was a position for the marker and there were velocity numbers on it of what it was that the monster came in at for bounce markers, for example, which were the ones that were usually wrong. Or also, there's a stop falling and land back on the ledge marker as well that had the same problem. And honestly, I would just move it a little bit by hand till it came out right, and I would type in different velocity numbers slightly. So that was not very scientific. But it was still helpful to have this system because it got me very close to the answer, and then I just had to tweak those things. So why does it happen? So one of the basic things that happens, when you're doing collision in a game, every frame, you want to make sure that the player is always in a valid area, right? And so the simulation process is like, okay, like if you just have something moving ballistically, it's like, okay, I'm just going to add velocity and acceleration to this thing, and it's going to end up somewhere. And then I check to see if it hit anything in the small time step that we just did, right? Which at large time steps, that could be very messy, and you could get very bad results because, well, it depends on how carefully you determine what was the first thing it collided with, right? You could imagine if your time step is really slow or your velocity is really fast and there are two things in the path and you happen to only look at them in the order of however objects are stored in the world, you might get the other one, right? The second one, when you really want to get the first one. And so systems tend to be very careful about detecting the time of first collision. So if you use a licensed SDK like Havoc or something, it's going to do that, right? You know, I was just writing my own physics, and I don't think this game would run very well with something like Havoc or anything. So it's a very simple thing about like, oh, I noticed we detected a wall. Let me snap you back outside the surface in some way, right? And so when we're talking about impacting a surface, then the place where the monster ended up is actually inside the floor, but then we pop it up and then it walks, and so the monster walking back is going to be above the floor. And so like the velocity numbers that we get are correct for inside the floor. They're not correct for on the surface of the floor, right? And then also the monster might move laterally a little bit when we pop it back. Sometimes there's just simple bugs like the way that you're updating your velocity and acceleration may not be very close to time direction invariant, actually. Like the structure of your code is it's t sub n. So I'm gonna add velocity, add acceleration to my velocity or whatever. And you maybe do something a little more sophisticated. Like in Braid, I think I use the midpoint method, which is a way of getting a more frame rate independent result with very little computation. So you do that, but the structure of it is like beginning of frame, velocity, acceleration, and then well, you probably do the 1/2 AT squared to apply it to the current thing, but the point being that acceleration is added into the velocity for the next frame. And then if you run time backwards, you kind of want to run the opposite. You want to run all those calculations in reverse exactly to get the right thing, but it won't be in reverse exactly because it's start of frame,
Oh, I see.
do stuff, right? The structure
Yeah.
of the, you would actually have to write a different loop, I think, to make it go backward, which I could have done if I had had the clarity of mind to do that, but I didn't.
Why do you want to redesign to have Tim not pop off if he's going on a monster? So the monster's going backwards, it's going to come alive, and you said it just pops you up, right? But you want to get rid of that? So the player then has to jump themselves?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm not saying I want to get rid of it because I don't have a better answer of what to do practically. Like the stuff I was suggesting at the end is more like the thought process of what I would do if I truly felt it was important to do that, right? But the decision that I made at the time was that it was actually better just to leave it the way that I shipped it. And, you know, there were some other factors that played into this. So one of them has to do with all the awkwardness that I was talking about how it would be to like sell it better, that you had to jump on the monster. But another one is because before this I had designed the final level of the game, which also, you know, has time going backwards, and there's a lot more stuff in that isn't exactly right. So for example, you jump off pretty high ledges like down, and when you reverse, you know, it flips your bitmap and you're like jumping up, but you're jumping up much higher than you would be able to actually, right? And to avoid that, like if I were being very, very strict about that, I would have to have a very constrained level design process where like you could never fall more than a couple player heights or however far you can jump, right? And so I didn't want that limitation. It was very hard to design that level to begin with, right? And so I already knew that I was not trying to make it be like exactly, like you could imagine. It's like, okay, this is reverse time, so anything that happens forward, when you reverse it, has to look exactly like perfect gameplay that you already would have seen in the rest of the game, right? And that just wasn't realistic for good gameplay as far as I could tell. And so I had already decided, hey, we're going to be a little bit soft about it. Like there's going to be a weirdness about things going in both directions of time, and the way they affect each other just creates a little bit of extra strangeness, right? And I think that actually makes sense in a lot of ways, even if you think about it deeply.
Just got double check something. Did I do those two? I think I did.
This level from the original prototype became the level you're now inside, the pit. The basic idea of the level is still intact. There's a key in a pit, you jump in to get the key, and maybe that's as far.
Alright, let's go this one.
When confronted with the fact that reversal didn't work perfectly, so that monsters flung into the air by these markers did not reach exactly the place they came from when recording the markers, the ideal thing to do would have been to keep working on the simulation code until the reversal worked perfectly. But when you're overwhelmed by the number of things to do to finish a game, and the simulation code is already pretty complicated because it has to support all kinds of different rules from all the different worlds, it can seem much more appealing just to do the quick fix. And tactically, this is often the right solution in terms of actually finishing the game, especially back when Braid was made. Lots of independent games would fail because the authors just got overwhelmed by how much work there was to do, so the games never got finished. I was very, very mindful of this and wanted to finish the game at all costs. The downside of a quick fix is that the imperfect reversal could be a symptom of some much deeper problem that is affecting other parts of the game in a negative way. And by doing a quick fix, rather than investigating and fixing the deeper problem, we could be causing big bugs elsewhere. Maybe rare bugs that we would not catch in testing, but that would cause bad experiences for a significant number of players. Many other games have had exactly this kind of problem. On the other hand, the imperfect reproduction of the markers could be a simple issue that affects only the World 1 levels, like a simple dependency on the order in which we update velocity and position. I chose not to open that potential rat's nest and just do the easy hand tweaking and work towards shipping the game.
did this one already.
And maybe this was the right choice because the game did get finished.
Yeah. I think we actually did that one. Programming Braid even more unusual particle system, and programming Braid's unusual particle system.
Braid's visuals are very, very dependent on particles. We use lots and lots of particles to create interesting looking motion in both the foreground and background. But all these particles need to rewind perfectly. That was one of the basic principles I adopted early on. The naive way to rewind particles would be just to store in the rewind buffer the position, speed, current color, and so forth of every single particle for every single frame, just like we do for any other gameplay object. And then we just restore those properties when you go backward in time. But this would use a huge amount of memory. Typically, there are only a handful of gameplay objects in a level, but even in the original game, there were thousands or tens of thousands of particles. Storing all that data would eat almost all the memory available for rewind, which would seriously curtail gameplay. Because each frame would take much more memory, we would store many fewer frames, so maybe you'd only be able to rewind for a few seconds instead of the 15 to 45 minutes that you could rewind in the original game. To get around this, particles in Braid work differently than they do in any other game I'm aware of. In pretty much every video game, particles are implemented as follows. You have some function that creates particles each frame, picking random properties like size, color, speed, and so on. Then you have another function that simulates all currently existing particles forward for a short period of time. applying gravity, drag from the air, changing the color of the particle over time, deciding whether the particle has completed its lifespan and should disappear. This function then gets called every frame, and each time it computes the new state of the particle, this just overwrites the old state. Once you've rendered the frame, there's no reason to remember that old state anymore. But under this scheme, particles simply can't go backward because this simulator function isn't bidirectional. Basic rules of physics, like air friction, destroy information. For example, once you've reached terminal velocity, it is not possible to deduce what speed you were going one step in the past. And once a particle has disappeared, you wouldn't know how to recreate it in its final state because all that information is just gone. But the classic particle implementation provides some hints for what we can do to fix this problem. Classically, when the particle is created, we get its random size, color, and so forth from a random number generator, and we were careful to seed that generator with a good value to ensure the output is fairly random looking. When you seed a deterministic random number generator, this determines the sequence of numbers that you will get afterward. That's what deterministic means. In normal situations, you just seed a generator one time. But if we take the unusual step of seeding the generator for each particle, based on some numeric identity of that particle, we could get reproducible results out of that spawner function no matter when and how often we call it. Seeding for each particle puts more demands on the random number generator. Low-quality generators can easily look less random if you seed them too often. And I did have this problem initially. Even higher quality generators can produce artifacted results if you seed with low integers, for example. But there are some simple strategies to just mix the numbers up a little to generate a higher seed value that is still deterministic. In order to make this per particle seeding work, we need an easy way to compute each particle's ID. Since each frame, one thing we do know is what time it is. We build the system so that the time allows us to uniquely identify a particle. For this to work, we take another unusual step, designing the emitters so that each one holds a fixed number of particles only. For example, if an emitter emits one particle per second and holds 10 particles, then each particle has a lifespan of 10 seconds. If the current game time is 35 seconds, then the 10 particles in the buffer will be particles number 26, 27, 28, and so on up to 35. These indices correspond to the spawn time of each particle, and thus they uniquely identify each particle. Now if we render a frame at 36 seconds, we will have particle 27, 28, 29, and so on up to 36. And these will all be the same ones as the previous list, except we dropped 26 off the front and added 36 to the back. This strange setup allows us to pick any number whatsoever for the current time. And then we know what particle numbers exist at that time, which means we know how to seed the generator, which means we know what all the particles look like exactly, even if we decide that this frame should be time equals 1 million seconds, and next frame should be time equals minus 1 billion seconds. So all particles have fixed lifetimes, but if we want to give them the appearance of variable lifetimes, we just fade them out faster or slower and just don't draw particles that have faded out all the way. But these particles do still functionally exist. So far, we've just been discussing the creation of the particles. But after they're created, we need to run that simulation function to evolve them over time. How do we do that? In principle, we could just do the classical particle thing and run small simulation time steps for each particle until we get them to the current time. But because we're recreating the particles each frame and our particle buffer holds particles of a range of ages, and some of them might be very old, we have to watch out because each frame we might be simulating way too many time steps and our game could run very slow. You might start thinking, hey, when you're going forward in time normally, you just save the data from the previous frame and you only need to run one time step. You only need to do this complicated, slow computation when going backward in time. Lots of computer science papers encourage this kind of strategy, but it's a bad way to think for interactive programs if you have any alternative. We want rewinding to be natural as walking. In fact, walking is rewinding in World 4. Either we can maintain a solid frame rate when rewinding, or we can't. If we can, then whatever we're doing for rewinding works for going forward too. If we can't maintain that solid frame rate when rewinding, well, that seriously damages the solid feelingness of the game, and we should work hard to change this. So I didn't want to consider some incremental system that has these kinds of problems. I wanted a flat system that would run at the same frame rate always. You might think about reducing the CPU load from the lazy approach by combining many simulation time steps into one so that you're just simulating one step representing a larger duration of time. Or you might try running many small steps but with a simplified function that's cheaper to run. But these approaches would not result in perfect visual reproduction of the particles. And in World 4, this could even result in large, objectionable discontinuities while walking, since you can walk left from a frame that you just simulated a moment ago to a frame where you were 5 minutes ago, and these need to line up seamlessly. In general, video game physics gives you different results when you simulate things for bigger or smaller time steps, and games that are carefully crafted might employ a variety of techniques to deal with this problem. So if your particles are doing normal physics, you can't cut corners, you just have to do a lot of computation. However, the particles in Braid don't affect gameplay in any way, they're just cosmetic. So we really have a lot of freedom about what the particle simulation function is. Rather than simulating exact physics that could cause problems for us, like the aforementioned air resistance, we can do simpler things that can be expressed in closed form. For example, a parameter like this particle slows down by 1 meter per second every second. This seems kind of physicsy, but it's frame rate independent, so you can take arbitrarily big time steps. This specific idea of constant deceleration has disadvantages, since if you let the particle live long enough, it will slow down, stop, and reverse direction, which is probably not what you want. But just don't let it live that long, or reduce the slowdown rate. Closed form means we can express the entire evolution of the particle in one short mathematical function, regardless of the amount of time we're simulating it for, and we always get the exact answer. Combined with the deterministically seeded spawning, this gives us the ability to reproduce the state of any particle at any time without storing any per particle data at all. This is how most of the particles work in Braid. Each particle is recreated from scratch and simulated to the current time every single frame, whether we are going forward or backward. The particles don't really exist at all between frames, as we don't keep their data at all.
Yeah, that was quite intentional programming there. I don't know if I understood much of that. There's another one. Where's the other one now? Think is there.
I said that most particles in Braid are handled in a fully deterministic way, where they're regenerated every frame, and apart from that, mostly don't exist. But when I got to World 6, I needed something else. I wanted particles that helped clearly illustrate the slowdown effect of the ring. But the ring is under your control. You can take and drop it any time. So if it slows down the particles, there's no way to represent those particles' positions across time in closed form, which means we'd need some kind of storage for them. On the other hand, if the ring doesn't slow down the particles, that makes the game weaker. So I wanted to come up with a solution for this. So I bit the bullet and stored the positions for some particles only. For World 6, I introduced a new kind of particle emitter called the Rainmaker, which drops the snowflakes that make the most prominent motion. Yes, the Rainmaker drops snow. It used to be rain, but we often don't rename our entities when the cosmetics of the game change. In the Anniversary Edition, we sometimes use Rainmakers to generate additional animated clouds. Because these clouds have a lot of motion, we want them to be slowed by the ring as well. The Rainmaker has a loop that saves out the positions of these particles in a tightly packed, efficient manner, and it also saves out the position of the ring over time, so that we don't have to save out the particle positions every frame. We just simulate the particles forward for some limited number of ring positions, so that we don't spend too much CPU doing this. After a certain amount of time has passed, we record new Rainmaker information with new positions for every particle. If you're familiar with video encoding, it's like storing iframes, which record a full frame of video, and then p-frames, which are just smaller changes from the previous frame. To reconstruct the current state, You just go to the closest previous iframe and then simulate a small number of p-frames. Besides packing the snowflakes efficiently, we just make sure there aren't too many to begin with. We just want to use them to visualize slowdown, so they're distributed through the space enough that we get a moderate density of them everywhere, but we don't rely on them for the most compelling visuals. Behind the snowflakes, we still have lots and lots of normal braid particles whose positions are not recorded, so they can't be slowed down. But the art style of World 6 is tuned so that these particles are subtler than they may be in other worlds, and they move more slowly, so you don't really notice that they're not affected by the ring. The snowflakes tend to be much louder in the player's attention. Sometimes we do add particles that move a bit faster, but these tend to be placed far enough from any potential ring drop points that the lack of slowdown is not too noticeable. By doing all this, we are able to achieve our goal. Note that this was a hybrid of technical solution with purposeful art direction. A lot of the best problem solving in games happens as a fusion of multiple disciplines. It's a good idea to always view your problems in a holistic way in order to help see how to bring the different disciplines to bear.
Yeah, that was challenging to understand. I'm gonna admit that. I'm not a coder. I think, is that all of us done in coding? Oh, let's do the puzzle then. Ah, cool, this is gonna be fun. He's moving a lot faster. Alright, let's see what happens here. Interesting. The velocity increased if I go 3 times faster. The velocity increased, so he gets to run ahead of me, maybe. But I'm not going to be able to touch him now. It's going to be too far away to get to. What is this dude? Alright, let's see what's further ahead. Oh, okay. That worked. I thought it was going to be a rabbit there for a second. Oh. Yeah, it is, yeah. Man, that rabbit moves even more faster. Alright, let's go back to that one in a bit. Let's try this other one. Maybe we could bounce back on these guys. Yeah. Not high enough. Yep, could do that. Hey, it's one down. That rabbit moves way too fast for my liking. Okay, we're onto something here. Cool, we got something. Oof, this is tricky. Nope, he doesn't come back up. Alright, let's see. Cool, we got something. Getting closer. Oh, come on. Yes, that was hard. Cool. Program done. Checking if there's anything else. Alright, let's see how much more of this puzzle we've done. Pardon me. Cool, 4 more pieces left to get. There's I know one from the previous area, from design, from visuals, that I haven't got. Playing through is just the whole game, right? Let's just read it. You can play the game in a normal way for the begin with some commentary. It's not all commentary that exists, as that would be too messy. It's a set hand selected selection. It'd be nice to play, nice with linear play. Cool. So I basically would have done all those ones. Alright, on to programming. Music, sorry. Alright, we start from the bottom. So this is like a sound wave going on here. Ambience. Down back again.
In the original Braid game, there were no ambient sounds except for, I think, 2 levels that had a simple rain loop. And there wasn't any sound of Tim moving around, so most of the time there's only music and some specific gameplay sounds. So in that sense, Braid is a good example of very simplistic or minimalistic game audio, which is you only hear the sound effects that serve a direct purpose of communicating stuff that happens in gameplay, like a cannon shooting or a door opening or a platform moving. And then also the sounds that give player feedback, like you jumped, you grabbed a ladder, you killed a monster, etc. This is a very basic use of sound in video games. You could call that old school or arcade style. But in a way you can compare this to only having artwork the gameplay layer, but not the background. So, I mean, imagine the background was only black like in very old arcade games. But just like the background artwork serves a purpose of creating a setting and a mood and some overall beauty to the game, of course, the background sound design of a game can help create the setting and give it some texture. We can't feel the materials with our hands and we can't smell the environment, of course, but with proper sound design we can get pretty close. And with a game like Braid that already put a lot of attention into the mood and atmosphere, we felt that there was a great unused potential here for enhancing that even further with ambience and Foley sounds. So what started out as a task of remastering the original sound effects soon became a task of adding a whole new dimension to the game. Ambient sounds make use of the original sound system in Braid, which means it's a single basic loop that plays. But where the original rain loop in these 2 levels I mentioned was only 6 seconds long and thereby felt very static, we now use durations of 30 plus seconds, giving it constant, imperceptible variation. We designed an ambience loop for each level carefully, so it was clear and focused and with no static or noisy elements. And this actually enables us to put them quite low in the mix, so just like with the graphics, there's a clear distinction between the gameplay elements and the background. Like with the music remastering, we introduced this change from the original game gradually, so the first levels are done gently and with respect for the original, then the later levels are much more abstract and designed soundscapes. So now that the world had sound, Tim started to feel very detached from that world because he moves around completely silent. So we needed to add some sound to him as well, and here the programmers added a new system that plays footsteps and clothes sounds when Tim walks, depending on the surface material he walks on, of course. And this is then used very subtly and doesn't really take much attention, but the fact that there is a faint noise when he moves around connects him more to the world, and in that sense, yeah, connects the player more to the game. A lot of the time you won't hear the ambience of Foley at all, we hope, as they are masked by the music, but since the music is very dynamic, it allows the ambience level to be static but still feel like it was turned up and down while playing. A small curiosity is that it seemed to us that even when the ambience is just a faint wind, this constant noise that it brings actually adds to the feeling of high definition sound. We actually felt that when switching back and forth between the old and the new version, this noise kind of made it sound clearer, and that was even before the music was remastered. So that's in a way ironic that more noise gave the feel of clearer sound.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. Kind of reminds you, this area reminds you of the puzzles in Witness. They were like some of the hardest puzzles in the game. Cloud cannon. Alright, let's see what we got here.
So a little bit about the cloud cannons and the fuses. Originally this world was very silent with only music playing, no rain and almost no cloud cannons.
Pardon me.
The cloud cannons had a very faint and abstract poof when shooting, and an almost inaudible sound when the clouds disappeared. And in our opinion, these sounds did not really connect well with the actual cannons. We wanted to create a much richer and more forceful sound that could give the cannons some weight, but also some beauty, and that the player would instinctively understand as coming from the cannons. We also felt there was a great unused potential for creating something very poetic in this level. The autumn feel of the colors and the rain combined with the very slow nature of these puzzles, and also the music piece, Romanesca, that is only heard here and then once again much longer into the game. A natural idea was to play with the sound of thunder that in an abstract way could connect both the cannons, the clouds and the rain, and even add to the poetry. So this is how they ended up. Another thing that wasn't in the original game was the sound of the fuses. They were there visually to indicate when the cannons will shoot, but it made sense to give that gameplay hint through audio as well. In this specific level we have some of the slowest fuses in the game, and they are almost burning constantly. So a constant sound like this would not communicate gameplay very well and also be a very annoying static noise. Instead we had the fuses sound only when they ignite, and then again half a second up until the actual shot. The rest of the time they are still dead quiet. And then finally we added rain, of course. Not rain as in constant white noise, but rather sporadic big wet drops in leaves and in puddles.
That's really cool. I never really thought too much about the sound effects, the Foley stuff. That's really cool. I like the way this guy speaks as well. He's quite concise and he's quite detailed. Yeah, definitely. Okay, when you're in the green area, that's when you get music. Or sound effect, at least, anyway. No? Just when you're on the trellis in general. Alright. Ambiences and time travel.
One thing we experimented with in World 4 was to give the impression that the music was freezing when the player is standing still. As we could only use a single sound for this, it generated a frozen sound from the music track, representing an average of the track's spectral content. However, even when playing it back very softly in the game, the sound quickly became annoying. In some way, one could think of World 4 as a world having no background music, except maybe towards the end, where you run a longer stretch to the right without any hindrances, and the music plays naturally as a result. For the time standing still sound, we ended up freezing the ambiences of the respective levels. In World 4, we only hear the very beginning of the tracks, since you scrub back and forth through the music as you move to the left and right respectively. With this being the primary function of the music, the remastered tracks remained close to the originals, except maybe in this particular level where some dynamic reverb has been added to the music. Not actually dynamic, since the reverb is baked into the music, but it feels so when moving the character around. In the beginning of the track, we mostly hear reverb, which can be associated with the rocky environment of the left part of the background. However, as we move towards the right, out of the rocky environment and into the open, the reverb is fading out. Conversely, moving to the left, the track now plays backwards and the reverb gradually fades in. The transition takes about 8 seconds, corresponding to the time it takes to move the character from the left to the right edge of the screen.
He actually sounds like Werner Herzog a bit, who is German, I think.
A bit about time traveling in sound, because as mentioned earlier, the original Braid
two different
did not
people,
have any
is it?
ambient sounds except in the 3 rain levels in World 3. But since we decided to add that extra dimension to all the levels in the remastered Braid, we started to face challenges here in World 4. Because in this world, when you move from left to right, you move in time. And thereby you also move back and forth in sound, since sound only exists in time. It means that at any given point on the horizontal axis of the game level, you will hear the exact same part of the ambience and the music, which means that we can be very precise about what you hear where in the level. In this specific level, where the camera is locked, it only takes about 6 seconds to walk from left to right in the screen. And that means it is only a 6-second long ambience you move back and forth in. So here we designed a single 6-second audio file that consists of a left-panned winter wind in the beginning and gradually became a right-panned warm water babble at the end. and thereby match the environment that Tim is walking through at any given moment. So he's actually walking back and forth in the sound file. And in many ways, this gave us a whole new perspective on sound design. It's like actually moving back and forth in a snapshot of time. And what then when Tim, and thereby time, doesn't move, and theoretically no sound can exist? Again, sound only exists in time. Here we tried to make our interpretation of a snapshot sound, or what we called a frozen sound of the ambience in the given level. A small curiosity is that when Tim walks up or down the little hill in the lower right of the screen, you hear a small glitch in the music. This is actually not a bug, but a feature, resulting from Tim slowing time a bit down while he also climbs the vertical axis. The same effect as if someone slowed down the turning record for a short moment. We actually wanted to fix this little music glitch that the level design presented, but since the glitch was also there in the original Braid, the new and old music tracks would come a tiny bit out of sync, which was against our principle of sample accuracy between the two versions, so we decided to keep it.
Oh yeah. Is it like because you're going up, like you're not going as fast as when you're walking normally, so it slows down the music? Okay, cool. What's going on there? Alright, the monsters. That's a cool little feature. As soon as you say monsters, you can see them above you. That's cool.
This sound effect of monsters is one of the first sounds we started out to redo, since we felt the original sounds had some built-in problems. First of all, there were only 2 variations of this sound in the original game. It was this one and this one. So, especially in the later levels where the monsters are dying constantly, these 2 sound effects become very tedious. Second problem was that they actually didn't connect very well to the visuals, in our opinion. They sounded more like human voice than strange troll head things. And also they didn't connect very well to each other in the way that the 2 sounds sounded so different that you actually try to find a meaning in which sound means what, although they play totally random. So we wanted to remake the sound entirely to be able to have both more variation but also more similarity between them, although that sounds a bit like a paradox. And then we wanted to make them connect more with the visuals, which meant more non-human, but still sound like the original Braid, which meant quite human. So, yeah. Furthermore, we had a note from John saying that they should sound like, and I quote, fun with an undertone that it's sad that you're killing something that just wanted to be there, so maybe it's a little more cute with an undertone of not being cute. End quote. So, as one can imagine, this wasn't very straightforward, and we tried a billion different approaches before ending up with the sound you hear. As it often is with sound design, it ended up being my own voice, barking my throat sore, which sounded like this. Yeah, these are the actual raw recordings, but they were then manipulated further afterwards. And to make it feel more physical and make it connect better visually, we also added a lot of body punch and chest sounds like this. So the original 2 very different variations of just voice playing in the game are now 14 variations of both voice and body. Another thing to note is this sound of monsters getting killed always played together with the player bouncing sound. This was a sound that was originally very cartoonish, as you can hear, and John wanted to move away from that. But still, to keep that original feel of the game and not change it too much, we remade the same sound with a large wooden ruler, but made it sound much softer, and again with many more variations to it.
Ah, cool.
As I said in the commentary about this monster kill sound, we went through a lot of iterations, and in the end it was signed off and everybody was happy, and the previous commentary about this sound was even recorded. And then, towards the very deadline, John had second thoughts about the sound and thought we had lost some of the original Braid idea, and I think he was right. But instead of talking about how we made yet another iteration on this sound, I'd rather talk a bit about what it is about this specific sound effect that is so hard to nail. First, we need to think, why do we even need the monsters to have a sound? Actually, we were at some point considering more sounds for them, like small clop 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 footsteps when they walk, or a small mumble when they turn, to make them more alive. But these considerations died quickly because that would be an extremely annoying noise in levels where they just walk mechanically back and forth. And also, exactly because they do behave so mechanical, we can't really make them come alive in any believable way. They are not NPCs that we pretend have any intelligence or free will. They are almost like robots or primitive bugs. So they should definitely not have any idle or walk sounds at all. But still, there is and should be a sound when they are killed. That sound is needed for several reasons. First, we want the player to know that the kill was executed successfully and that they gained the jump height from it. That confirming part could easily be achieved by any sound, a beep or a bell or whatever UI sound. And we actually also have the ruler sound to take care of that part. But we also want the player to know that there was a cost. You did actually kill something that wasn't just a robot. So it is a step more than just a UI sound, that you need to feel some kind of flesh and blood and mind. In the original game, John found this sound for that purpose. And it definitely does the job of confirming the kill and also making you feel a tiny bit bad about it if you have any heart at all. So John's original sound actually works and serves these two practical purposes well. So when doing the remaster, we could have gone with that idea by just making this sound better and make some more variations of it. But as mentioned, we didn't feel this sound glued to the visuals. It felt like a sound coming from the game and not from the monsters themselves. So we would have to find the glue that glues the sound to the monster you just killed. And that's where you start thinking of what they actually are. They are a two-dimensional head with feet living inside a painting, born out of a cannon and living a sad mechanical life. They are lethal but easily killed. And what do a creature like that sound like? And of course this question is so open and abstract and can be interpreted in so many ways. So no matter what Martin and I came up with, we either disagreed internally or John thought it just didn't sound right. I started to have that feeling that we would never find the right voice for this because every person hears this differently. And you can imagine what I felt when John wanted to tweak this sound again right before the game launched. I found some examples here from that early, painful but fun process. Seen in retrospect, we were pretty settled on the body part of the sound, as you can hear, but we tried to find the voice of the monsters. And by doing that, I think we just moved more and more away from the original idea, which didn't become obvious until much later. But actually in this case, I see now that we had the answer right in front of us. We didn't need to invent the wheel again because this is a remaster and John already defined the voice decades ago. It seems so obvious now that we just had to add that glue that we felt was missing. And I think these body and chest sounds we developed quite early on actually does the trick. The new sounds are as simple as a bunch of extra variations of the human, which I then performed myself, and then various chest punches, and also nose sounds like this one. And this is actually added for more technical reasons, to fill a bit in the upper part of the frequency spectrum. And that's something I'd always do on these important communicating sounds, make sure that they are full frequency so they stand out of the mix of the music in any kind of listening environment. So this is where these sounds ended for now at least. Let's see if there's another iteration in a week or so.
It's too funny. What's going on up here? Cannons.
This was a level in the original game that was rather noisy. There are cannons shooting constantly all over, making the sound a cacophony you can't really decode or get any useful information from. Furthermore, this constant noise disturbs the mood of the music, so all in all, sound loses its purpose here and you get tired, and a lot of people probably turned off audio at this point in the game, unfortunately. So here we needed to clean up the whole mix to make it communicate the gameplay better, meaning that only the most relevant sounds at any given moment should be heard. That would also make it less innovating and give room for the mood of the music. First thing is that the original cannons didn't really sound like cannons, so you don't instinctively link these sounds to anything meaningful relating to the gameplay. Though of course at this point in the game you will probably have learned what the sound is, so this is more an issue in the earlier levels. And then furthermore, there were only 2 different shot sounds in the original game, making it even more monotonous. They were these 2 sounds, and the impacts were like this. So we designed all new shots and impact sounds that had more hints of powder and fire and had much more variation in them. The only thing we kept from the original sound effects was the very characteristic little attack sound that to us made it keep the Braid signature. So this is how the new sounds ended up. And here's some of the bullet impacts. Secondly, we tweaked a lot on the overall volume and listening radius of each cannon in this level to make sure you only hear the immediately relevant cannons and shots. And thirdly, but probably most important, we introduced stereo panning of sounds. Because in the original game all sounds played heart center, but by introducing stereo panning we opened up the whole audio image, making it much easier for the brain to decode and point out what objects make which sound. A small note on the cannon shots and impact is that, as mentioned, they are completely redone from scratch except for the very small attack sound. But because we wanted all sounds in the game to be kept in this expressionistic art style like in organic painting, we didn't focus so much on sounds from actual shots and cannons, but more on small chemical reactions and strange sparks and puffs. So here are some of the elements that these shots consist of. And then this is how it ended up, the remastered sounds when shooting a normal bullet and shooting monsters and finally shooting clouds.
Cool. Expressionism.
I actually wanted to talk a bit about expressionism in sound because the graphics of Braid is like a living painting in an art style that you could call expressionism. And we wanted the whole game to be in an audio style that matched that, a sort of expressionist audio. But there is not much sound in visual art history, so we had to make that up. What we mean by expressionism is that the sound should express a feeling rather than sound realistic. Or you could also say that we wanted the audio to sound like it was painted rather than realistic or photographed. A good example of this approach is here in the boss level in World 3.7. The original boss sounds all had this metallic robot ring to them that was probably due to too much time stretching, or we don't know actually, but it sounded like this. But this robot texture seemed a bit wrong with respect to the graphics. So we wanted to redesign the boss and make it sound much more organic and less digital. The expressionist approach dictated that we should not make it sound like a realistic monster, if you could say that, or an animal, but rather express that in an hand-painted way. But how to paint a sound? You cannot really just take a brush and start painting. But luckily the solution here seemed obvious, because earlier on I had been playing a lot with making monster growls by scratching my nail against different cardboard boxes of different sizes. It sounds like this. I'm actually just scratching my nail over the box. So this technique actually made it possible to more or less draw
cool.
the same
That's good.
sounds or perform them, the same sounds as we hear in the game. Although this seemed to fit the idea of expressionist monster sounds perfectly, we also wanted to stay true to the original wobbly robot feel, and this was too far away from that. So I added a simple tremolo effect to the cardboard growls. But I also kept the originals playing underneath to hint that same tone. And then I also actually stumbled upon some great walrus sounds that reminded me of so much of the Braid boss, so I simply had to use them. And then by adding this same tremolo effect to these walrus grunts, I could make them blend seamlessly with the cardboard growls, so it all played together as one sound. We use that same hand paint approach in the design of all the sounds throughout the game. Maybe not as obvious as here, where the sounds are actually performed by hand, but in the sense that the sounds should not sound realistic, but rather convey a feeling. In general, the idea of making the sounds hand-painted by brush is often done by making simplistic but full, frequent and colorful sound effects, and then using various analog audio equipment to blur the edges and give that organic feel. It's funny how it's hard to describe these things without using picture metaphors all the time.
This was the first level we worked on as a prototype for the audio remaster. The track, The Darkening Ground, featured in this level, was probably the most problematic track of the game, but also one of the more interesting ones. It contains a slow build-up, a climax, and a slow fall-off, which works okay if the time you spend getting through the level equals the duration of the track. However, spending more time results in awkward situations, such as long stretches of silences in the middle of a boss fight. The silence in the beginning of the track also meant that there's complete silence in the game when you enter the level. The only solution for the remastered version was to get rid of the track's overall dynamic arc by patching in processed materials from the track itself into the more silent parts. However, having the same intensity when you enter the level and the boss is asleep as when actually fighting the boss was still far from idle, and in both scenarios the music seemed somewhat out of place. So I did a second iteration in which the duration of the track is double. This way we could have a more soft entry that wouldn't recur for a considerable amount of time. Yet it was still far from idle, as the player could still be fighting the boss when the intensity of the track started to decline. Also, to make it work, we'd had to double the duration of the original version as well, whereby we break the rule of staying true to the original tracks. What we needed was a traditional music stage system featuring exploration and combat. In this way we could have a low-key version for the explore part and a dramatic version to accompany the boss fight. We went on to create a more soothing version of the exploration music that would play when having beaten the boss. Hence we had 3 states with different versions of the original track, namely Explore, Combat and Resolution. The Resolution version also solved a problem in the subsequent level where the original track seemed extremely out of place. Meanwhile, stems for the track arrived, offering much more flexibility for designing the 3 variations of the track. The track that you hear in the original game, marked in yellow, had been extracted from a longer theater performance, and only half of the stems, marked in green, had been included in the final mix. A 40-second intensity valley around the middle of the extracted part had also been cut out, so I edited the stems accordingly and exported the contents within the bounds of the original in-game track for further processing. The combat version of The Darkening Ground carries the intensity of the original track's climax throughout. It focuses on the dissonant cello solo, the red segments, to which sub-bass and distortion have been added. To cover the low-key parts of the original track, the solo now plays over twice, one of the times across the loop point. There's also a couple of drone layers which have been created by freezing some of the original content and distorting it. The exploration version focuses on the intensity of the opening and closing part of the original track. The dissonant cello solo has been excluded and replaced by more drony materials derived from the stems. The drones were created by freezing different elements of the stems and blending it all together. The result was mixed with a couple of the original stems, including one featuring low cello drones and another with some deep onsets. The original track, shown at the top, serves as a reference. During the process I was continuously toggling between listening to this track and the new remastered one, just as the player can do in the game. As can be seen, the contents of the remaster go well beyond the boundaries of the original. This allowed for creating a smooth loop point and to avoid the fade from and to silence found in the original. The rendered result is finally matched with the original in-game track to ensure sample accuracy between the two. For smooth looping, a small bite of the pre-entry materials is cut out and faded in just before the end of the track. The result is a seemingly endless drone, yet structurally bound to the original, which can be experienced by toggling between the original and the remastered version. Once the player has beaten the boss, we wanted the music to calm down and become more soothing. This resolution version would also play in the subsequent level, where it feels more suitable than the original disharmonic track. I will talk about this version in the next level.
Can you get up there? Oh. Nope, doesn't look like it. Mimics.
So the mimics, these pink rabbits that jump around and attack you. These sounds were some of the sounds that we originally felt sounded quite off aesthetically. Part of them sounded too familiar, like house cats meowing, rather than strange and lethal pink rabbits. And other parts sounded very strangely distorted and bad in terms of technical quality. So we needed to redo all of these sounds for different reasons and in different ways. It is quite challenging to design an animal that sounds cute and nice while it jumps happily around and even when it dies, but at the same time sound vicious and cruel when it attacks, and still make it sound like it comes from the same tiny creature, and also sound familiar to the players who know the original sounds. We wanted to move away from all references to house cats, but to keep the size and pitch and feel of this animal. One of the original sounds had this cuteness combined with a gritty and grating hiss texture. It sounded like this. So this sound sounded both cute and cruel at the same time, so we wanted to try to add that spice to all the sounds, to make them connect better together and come from the same animal. In order to do that, we tried a lot of different ways to distort the original sounds, which all didn't work out very well. So what we ended up doing was the good old deflate a balloon into the mouth sound. We recorded a ton of this. And then we played it back in double tempo, like this.
Crazy. This sounds fucking freaky.
And this gritty, high-pitch texture you hear was then actually added to all the new mimic sounds we made. In the end, it turned out to become a giant patchwork of restored original sounds and completely new sounds based on different monkey recordings actually. Some of them imitating the originals and others replacing the cat sounds with something completely different. But all of these new sounds have this added balloon texture underneath.
The draws of each of the violins are different as well.
I mentioned earlier that we wanted to have the mimics not sound like house cats, which they obviously do now. And that's because right in the end, right before deadline, John decided that we'd gone too far away from the original Braid vibe or feel and this sound the mimics make when they leap towards you. And that by removing the cat sounds completely, we'd actually removed an important thing about the game. Actually, this has been a great challenge throughout the process, this balance between making a new and improved game that sounds great for first-timers but still make it sound familiar to those who know the original. And especially this mimic leap sound has been through many iterations and was, as you can hear, even changed right before launch. So anyway, the original game had these two leap sounds playing. And I actually simply reused them and blended them together with the balloon sounds I just mentioned. But of course the original problem with only having two variations of this sound still persisted. So I dived through literally hundreds of cat recordings to find some that had that same kind of cat language, because when you're chased around by a single mimic, it just doesn't seem believable if it talks with different voices each time it jumps, which I think is a problem in the original game. So, we needed more cats. One might think that a cat just sounds like a cat, but it turns out they have very different voices, and when you start to compare them side by side with the Braid sounds, they just don't sound very alike. I did, however, find a handful of single meows that were close enough in language and tone and voice, and I then pitched and stretched and equalized and manipulated them to make them match the two originals. But not match too much, because we also want the variation, so that's really a delicate balance. So this is how the mimics sounded before they were changed a month before launch. And here are the two new leap sounds that are based on the originals and the balloons. And these are then some of the new imitations that are constructed. They all sound kind of distorted, which is because of the balloon sound. But I think that's actually part of why they sound more vicious than just cats, and I also think it gives this undefinable Braid vibe the original leap sounds had.
Alright, keys on the other side. Have to go around. Right, what do we got here? So yeah, this is laid out like a music sheet. The house.
For the Braid Anniversary Edition, we wanted to solve a number of issues.
Actually, give me 1 second. I just want to take a tablet. I've got a bit of a headache. I'm gonna have a break for 5 minutes, and then be right back. going back. Let's just get straight back into it.
With the music of the original. For the Braid Anniversary Edition, we wanted to solve a number of issues with the music of the original, including shortage of tracks, inconsistency between them, bad sounding DSP, and silence at the loop points. However, while fixing these issues, we wanted the remastered versions of the tracks to continuously mirror the originals, especially since the player can toggle between the two at any given moment. For this reason, the two versions are always kept in sync, sample accurately to avoid any phasing issues when transitioning between them. Correspondingly, we couldn't add any new tracks, meaning we'd had to come up with creative ways of solving the repetitiveness resulting from reusing the limited amount of tracks throughout the game. A related issue was that some of the original tracks, due to their inherent happy mood, appear out of place in the later, much darker part of the game. The solution was to remix or even redesign the tracks, in this way added the needed variation while retaining the underlying structure of the originals. The original score features tracks with beginnings and endings, and as a result there are silences at the loop points. To get rid of these awkward silences and reduce the sensations of a track starting over, the loop points have been patched up using content extracted from the respective tracks. The mastering involved a lot of hardware processing, also used on the sound effects, in this way helping to glue the whole mix together. Unlike the sound effects, each recurring music track has a unique version for each world. So for example, in the Rainy World 3, the pizzicato strings were processed to make them sound more raindrop-like. With the addition of alternative versions that will play according to game states in some levels, the 11 original tracks have become 35 tracks in the remastered version. During the process, Thekla managed to acquire stems for about half of the original tracks, which provided a lot of opportunities in remastering and remixing the tracks. Prepping the stems was a complex task, since the tracks had originally been recorded on multitrack tape and playback speed during transfer had deviated a little from when doing the original mixes. Some stems would even drift slightly from each other, probably because they had been transferred one at a time, rolling the tape over each time. In isolation, this would probably have been unproblematic, but with the player's ability to toggle between original and remaster, the two versions had to remain in perfect sync at all times. The track Manum, which serves as the title music of the game, was remastered from the original stereo track before stems were acquired. The original track sounded good already, needing only a little EQing. In order to complement the city vibe of the opening of the game, the overall stereo feel was widened to create an enveloping effect. Working with stems later on didn't yield a better result, so we stuck with the first version. The background drone was extended in order to conceal the loop point. Like the title version of Manum, this alternative version was created from the original stereo track, as we hadn't received the stems yet, and it worked out so well that we didn't even attempt to approve it using stems. The basic idea was to separate the solo instruments from the background drone and then trigger fragments of the solos when opening the books. This wasn't too hard to achieve using the original stereo mix, since the background drone is very static. Using the drone as a noise profile in a denoising algorithm, the solo instrument would be isolated, and by inverting the process, we'd largely have the drone isolated. The drone part retained an ethereal shadow of the melody, so when you walk from the house into the cloud, it feels like the melody is being pushed into the background, behind the clouds. The instrument fragments that are triggered when opening the books are a mix of cello flageolets and Korean lute gestures, extracted from the original stereo track.
the epilogue. Yeah.
In the original game, there's no music or ambience in the epilogue, making it dead quiet. This has a somewhat odd feeling to it that we wanted to fix while keeping the overall calmness of the world. It felt natural to use Manum for the epilogue, since in this way it anticipates the very beginning of the game to which the player is transported when completing the epilogue. In this way the epilogue somewhat becomes a prologue as well, enhancing the feel of being looped back to the beginning. To support the light, ethereal quality of the level, it features the processed version of the solo cello. Like in the Cloud Room, you can hear a drone version as background music and then trigger melodic fragments when opening the books. The singing voice of the princess was also in tune with the track, and it was processed in order to make it sound more distant.
The puzzle screen.
In order to add variation and avoid wearing out the tracks, I did some processing on the music when the player enters the puzzle screens. The presence of the instruments is reduced by way of attenuating mono content, high frequency spikes and transients, and adding first reflections. The goal was to make it sound like the music was playing from the next room. You can hear the difference by entering and exiting the puzzle screens in the different levels.
Downstream World 2.
The challenge with Downstream was that the later part of the track is very intense and potentially innovating over repeated listening, especially if you're struggling to solve a puzzle. A crucial factor in this regard is the rather piercing quality of the solo violin, so a lot of work went into softening the higher frequencies. Apart from regular EQing, the plugin Soothe was used heavily to reduce frequency spikes above 4 kHz. As a result, the piece feels less aggressive, and to soften the track even further and make it sit better in the environment, a mountain-like echo was added to the overall mix. Unfortunately, we didn't have stems for Downstream, which posed some challenges for the remastered version later in the game.
Lullaby Set World 2.
In contrast to Downstream, Lullaby Set sounded somewhat dull with a slightly pressing mid-range. This was solved by way of EQ, valve distortion, and adding a bit of hardware spring reverb to add brilliance. For consistency, the same mountain-like echo used in Downstream was added to the overall mix. We didn't have stems for this track, which wasn't a big issue since it's only playing in World 2, where we wanted to stay close to the original.
Can't go up there.
Remastering Tell It by Heart from stems brought about a result deviating a little too much from the original, most likely because some processing had been added to the original stereo mix. Also, reverse engineering the mixing of numerous microphones and direct inputs of the cello proved very difficult. As we're still in the early part of the game and it's the first time we hear this track, we wanted to stay close to the original version. So rather than using stems, I ended up processing the original track. The most noticeable change made was bringing forth the pizzicato accompaniment in order to complement the rainy setting of the game world. Fortunately, the melody had been doubled and panned hard left-right, which meant that it could be separated from the accompaniment by turning down the mid part of the signal. Inverting the process provided the isolated pizzicato accompaniment, which was further processed using the transient designer spiff to enhance the plucking sound before recombining it with the melody. The mixed result was processed quite a lot. Again, a piercing quality in some of the higher melodic materials was problematic and solved using the plugin Zeus. Then various outboard gear was used, including EQ, valves, tape and reverb, making the track more transparent and tangible. In the original game, the first minute of the track, containing some sustained cello flageolets, had been removed, presumably to get the main ostinato starting from the get-go. This little outtake came in handy when it came to fix the silent loop point issue. By chance it worked well when padding a 20-second offset into the end of the track. In this way the track appears to be starting over while still finishing up. Now that we had the ability to separate the pizzicato accompaniment from the melody, I also created a version for the cave. Here the pizzicato, otherwise associated with the rain, is softened and pitched down an octave, both symbolizing that we are in shelter from the rain and moving downwards into the ground. One goal of the Romanesque redesign was, ironically, to make less romantic. This was primarily achieved by removing the higher notes, which carried much of the romantic harmonization. What's left is a simple modal wamp, and consequently the track also became darker, which was another goal of the redesign. However, by getting rid of the higher notes, we ran into the same issue as with Undercurrent, namely that the track became too blurry when pitched down. So I added the transients of the original into the mix. These are quite subtle and not very noticeable when playing at normal speed, but when the track is pitched down, they make a huge difference. The redesigned version also had to sound more ambient and full to accompany the cityscape and the visuals, so a smeared version of the harp bass along with a pitched down version for sub bass were added to the composition.
Cool, I'm up here now. Darkening Ground Combat.
This was the first level we worked on as a prototype for
Oh.
the audio remaster.
We've done this one already.
The track, The Darkening Ground.
Yeah, I think I've done it. Yeah. The Darkening Ground resolution.
In order to make the resolution version of The Darkening Ground feel more relaxed, some of the stems were processed using harmonic content from the pizzicato ostinato from the track Tell It By Heart. By referencing Tell It By Heart, the main featured track of World 3, the resolution track feels a bit like a recapitulation. In the following example, you can hear the result of this processing. First we hear a sample from the stem featuring some reversed sticks. Next up we hear the pizzicato ostinato from Tell It By Heart. And finally we hear the result of convolving the reversed sticks with the pizzicato ostinato. The process is a bit like coding one sound with another, or multiplying the spectrum of one sound with another. Let's hear the three sounds again, quickly after each other. First the stem featuring the reversed sticks. Then the pizzicato ostinato from Tell It By Heart. And then finally, the spectral interpolation of the two sounds that you just heard.
Yeah, it's cool. Quite eerie.
In the final mix of the resolution track, some of the unprocessed stems were added, making the connection between the remaster and the original versions less obscure. Again, having some pre- and post-exit materials allowed for masking the loop point and creating the impression of an everlasting soundscape.
Undercurrent, World 5.
Much effort went into the remastering of the track Undercurrent, as the original is somewhat intense and potentially annoying when playing over several times. This is partly due to the nasal quality of the lead cello, some cluttering in the mid-range of the spectrum, and an overall narrow stereo field. So in this case, the stems came in handy, and they were all processed and improved individually before added to the final mix. For the solo part, played on an electric cello, the nasal quality was caused by a small spike around 1200 Hz. Interestingly, this spike got evened out by way of match EQ when using an acoustic cello recording as reference. A match EQ allows you to analyze the frequency spectra of a target and a reference sounds respectively, and then calculate an EQ curve based on the difference between the two. In this case, the resulting EQ curve, illustrated in orange, represents the treatment that the electric cello needed in order to adopt the spectral makeup of the acoustic cello. Generally, the original mix was quite narrow in terms of stereo width, which was primarily solved by adding width to the original stems, giving each instrument its own defined space in the mix. You can hear the difference between the final mixes by toggling between the original and remastered version. In the original game, the parallel universe mechanic is illustrated sonically by adding a muffled delay to the music using real-time DSP. While it does a good job in communicating the idea, the result is musically somewhat messy as the mid-range gets cluttered and the delay time doesn't match the tempi of the tracks. In order to solve this, we created bespoke, offline or pre-rendered versions of the parallel universe music, which would simply fade in and out to simulate the original effect. In this way, it became possible to utilize the delays musically, as well as finding more creative ways of treating the delayed layer than simply adding a low-pass filter. To keep the track balanced, the delayed materials were processed, often using pitch shifting. So for example, the delayed version of the cello lead would play an octave below the original. Downstream, with its light, happy feel, was probably the track that felt most out of place in the context of World 6. Accordingly, it was the track that needed the most substantial treatment. Unfortunately, it was also one of the tracks for which we didn't manage to acquire stems, which ultimately meant that we have to sacrifice clarity for the sake of mood. Luckily though, the track plays towards the end of World 6, where the player is already familiar with the ring game mechanic, and the music no longer needs to do the heavy lifting in terms of communicating this to the player. One goal of the redesign was to make the music appear slower. This was primarily done by replacing the 6/8 feel with straight 4/4. Also, the harmonic progressions in the track are simplified, overriding many modulations, in this way making it more dark and grounded. Again, the track was split into rhythmic and harmonic content using the DMix Pro algorithm. However, because the track is very active tonally, it was necessary to take a more drony approach to the redesign. To ensure recognizability, some elements were isolated using Melodyne, including a small violin motif. Here's a small snippet of the original track. And here's how it sounds when isolating the violin using the Melodyne software. Splitting rhythmic from harmonic materials was quite complicated in this track, and with no stems available, I ended up doing some drum replacement, or rather addition, using a sampled medieval drum. The extracted drum of the original track was analyzed in Melodyne, and the resulting MIDI data was used to trigger the drum, determining both timing and velocity of each drum hit. In this way, although adding sounds felt a bit like cheating, at least the original performance was kept. Let's hear how it sounds when the rhythmic content is extracted from the original track. Now let's hear the same part, but with the drum replacement. And finally, let's hear how it sounds when combining the two and adding a lot of processing.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I wonder what Provenor was to isolate the sound. That sounds like it would be very useful for other projects. What's up this way?
In World 6, the notion of remastering is expanded to include remixing, if not to say decomposition and redesign of the original tracks. Throughout the game, the worlds gradually become darker, a feature that isn't really echoed in the music. Rather, in the original game, the same handful of tracks keeps playing, eventually resulting in a mismatch between visuals and music. This is most noticeable in World 6, where the darkness is accompanied by tracks such as Downstream, previously associated with the Sunny World 2. The reuse of tracks in the original game also takes a bit away from the excitement of having made progress, and the tracks naturally start suffering from wear and tear as well. The new, darker versions of the tracks generally became more ambient in nature, which caused a problem related to World 6 game mechanic, namely the ring that slows down time. John had originally selected the tracks on the basis that they would remain somewhat recognizable even when slowed down considerably. So while working with more drony materials, we had to retain some transient information that would translate properly when slowed down.
Undergoing World 6.
Working from the original stereo mix, the general idea was to make the track more foreboding and suspenseful. The rhythm is made to sound more like a beating heart, and the continuous drones are processed with a tremolo effect. To make this possible, the original track was divided into drum and harmonic part using DMix Pro. Here's the extracted drum part. And now the harmonic part. Dividing the original track into drum and harmonic part didn't come without obvious artifacts, so a lot of post-processing had to be done. Here's how the treated drum parts sound like. And now the harmonic part. While the redesigned version of the track was very moody and fitted the artwork, it had too little content that remained audible when pitched down by the game. Luckily stems came in, which helped to solve this issue. The fifth and final iteration includes elements from the first version, but the melody is now reintroduced. both because it became possible with stems available, but also because the cello was an important element when pitching down the music.
Cool. Cool. I'll come back to that later. Oh, I want to check out what's down here first. The ring. Oh, that was the other one. Okay.
The sound of the ring always sounded a bit strange to us in the original game. It had this small whistle to it that made it sound like a glitch. It is actually not a glitch, but a natural consequence of the ring function itself, because the moment you place the ring, time speed goes rapidly down or up, and thereby also sound playback speed, which gives this very fast pitch bend that sounds like a small whistle. The actual sound effect of the ring in real time, I mean the original sound effect, sounds like this when you drop the ring and like this when you take the ring. We felt that this clean pitch ringing sound corresponded better with a time manipulating gold ring than the whistle glitch did. But again, we didn't want to change the actual behavior of the playback system. So it took a great amount of trial and error to create a sound effect that played well under these strange time speed circumstances. The simplest way to achieve it was to introduce a very small delay in the sound effect itself, so the clean ringing waits until time speed has settled, which it does pretty fast. Although this delay is only 100 milliseconds, it still has the drawback of giving the player a feel of lag in the game when pressing the button. So we introduced a non-tonal low-frequency noise that plays immediately and had no tone to it. This low noise bends in pitch, of course, but it's less obvious, and it seemed to actually match the visual effect and the feel of causing a ripple in time. It sounded to us almost like a heartbeat from the ring. So this is the final sound effect as we designed it in real time. You'll note there's a tiny delay between the heartbeat and the ring sound. We then took this up to 5 times playback speed before it was put into the game, because that's how much the time speed goes down when dropping the ring. So the sound effect is like this. And then this is how it sounds in the game when played back together with the time speed change. The very observant listener will probably notice that the ambient sounds are not affected by the ring and the time speed changes the way the music is. So why is that? First, the ambient sounds are diegetic, happening somewhere out there in the city, and the time speed change is only local around the ring. So the ring simply doesn't reach that far. That's the logic reason. And the second reason is we tried it, but it didn't sound very good. Obviously, in the original game, there wasn't any ambient sound, so this was a new question we introduced.
What do you have around here? Alright. Puzzle time now. We got a door and a key. The door's normal, the key is green. I got a feeling they're gonna make us do a similar puzzle like multiple keys, multiple doors situation. what a drop down's for, I suppose. And we got some levers here as well. That didn't do anything. We got a normal key there. And a door. Okay, cool. So if you remember the previous episode, I was saying that like to work with multiple doors and multiple keys, you can't have both key and door be one element. So you can't have a key and door both be green, or a key and door both be normal. So so in this case up here, it's not the same. So I should be able to work. So I could open a door, reverse time, collect the key again, and the door will always stay open. And then down below we got the door was. We'll figure it out when we get to that. Interesting. Oh, motherfucker. You can't put it backwards there. I have to always go forward. Oh, this is gonna make life hard. But I could get this guy to get the key. There you go, mate. Take it. He's got the key, but I can't go backwards. Keep it going right, it should be fine. Okay. Both doors are done. Now I got this key, and this one I can take back. Motherfucker. No. Give me the, I want to keep the green key. Alright, cool. Alright, let's see what happens there. Oh, there's my key. Alright, cool. That can only be used there. What did I do? It's broken, whatever it did. Now what? I can't get back myself. I don't think I can even jump on there. Maybe I can. But I can't go this way. Cool. Yeah. I need to jump on that bridge. So I can't take it more that way, so if, once I activate, can I pull it back? I can. Should be coming back. There's no way I reach that in time, right? Do I actually... You know what? Do I actually need a key? They must be wanting me to use the key. Let's just take a look at what's going on. Huh, cool. Speed constraints.
Yeah, in that sense, the whole sound in Braid is very important because it's the sound that communicates the time. especially in the ring level, but also when you rewind in the previous levels. It's really the sound of the music that communicates to the player what time does at what moment.
Yeah, it's so obvious in a way, and somehow I didn't think of that. But the music kind of has to be recognizable and sound like music. Otherwise, you wouldn't, like, if the music was noise, you wouldn't be able to hear what you're doing with the scrubbing and it has to sound like you have to have a clear pitch to listen to.
Yeah, and then again in World 6 it was kind of a compromise, because as you move into the world there's less and less kind of transient materials. So it's more like serving to set the mood, basically, and then the time manipulation becomes less obvious. So that's a trade-off in a way.
But still, it has a pitch and a tone, so you can hear it bend down. Whereas if it was only non-tonal ambience, you wouldn't have that clear feeling of now the pitch is going, or the time is going down.
Yeah.
It was interesting when we heard the level with the ring. There was like some harp tones that we noticed that we actually just heard the nails of the player, because all of the harmonic contact was pushed down in the frequency spectrum where we couldn't distinguish it anymore. But it's only when you're very close to the ring you can hear this, but you can still hear the nails of the player, which is a cool sound, I think.
So that's also a track where there were 2 iterations. So the first one was the like drony version, where you only hear like the deeper tones and kind of averaged or smeared out or whatever. And then we discussed this issue of not being able to hear the transient material when pitching down. So it's basically just the original track added in, and then with a high pass filter very high up.
I think there's something, if you play a lot with pitching samples up and down, I start to see it as you are revealing something that was always there but you couldn't hear before. Like you if you have the sound of an elephant and you keep pitching it up, like you will reveal that it is also in a way like a mouse, because it sounds a little bit like a mouse when it's which is pitched all the way up, and if you pull it down you will hear the details that were above the audible range. If you have a high quality recording, you can discover these things, and I guess in this case you would discover all the high frequency content of that particular recording in a lower frequency.
That was actually a general challenge of the whole game, both music and sound effects and everything, that everything we did needed to be able to be played in very low tempo. So we really discovered that sound effects, we needed to test everything in very slow and very high, and the music as well. So that is some new kind of demands for the actual mixing of the effects.
Yeah, that's something we would never normally have to do, right? Like we would never hear a sound played at a 1/32th speed in a normal project.
No.
Well, 6 in high pass filter. I'm just going to take a quick gander up here. Then I'll be a locked door. Nope, we're all good. Tell you your background as well. Alright.
It was interesting that to me those tracks in the dark world 6 is really out of place, but I learned that John picked them because they had like high frequency content, because you have the ring which just slows the time down like incredibly, and he wanted to make sure that you could actually hear stuff.
Yeah.
So for example, he had like Romanesca, the harp piece and stuff like that, and in the first iteration just got rid of all that and just had the ambient stuff, and it sounded really cool, but it had the problem that you couldn't hear those transients anymore.
Yeah.
No, so it didn't communicate the time going up and
Yeah,
down
yes.
as clear as the original.
Yeah, so
John had a good point about that. So
yeah, so sometimes I could find a stem with the rhythmic material and then maybe do like a high pass filter or something and add it to what has already been done.
Right.
Alright, the last one, the seascape. Did we do it already? No, apparently not.
For the Braid Anniversary Edition, we wanted to solve a number of issues with the music of the original, including shortage of tracks, inconsistency between them, bad sounding DSP, and silence at the loop points. However, while fixing these issues, we wanted the remastered versions of the tracks to continuously mirror the originals, especially since the player can toggle between the two at any given moment. For this reason, the two versions are always kept in sync, sample accurately to avoid any phasing issues when transitioning between them. Correspondingly, we couldn't add any new tracks, meaning we'd had to come up with creative ways of solving the repetitiveness resulting from reusing the limited amount of tracks throughout the game. A related issue was that some of the original tracks, due to their inherent happy mood, appear out of place in the later, much darker part of the game. The solution was to remix or even redesign the tracks. In this way, added the needed variation while retaining the underlying structure of the originals. The original score features tracks with beginnings and endings, and as a result, there are silences at the loop points. To get rid of these awkward silences and reduce the sensations of a track starting over, the loop points have been patched up using content extracted from the respective tracks. The mastering involved a lot of hardware processing, also used on the sound effects, in this way helping to glue the whole mix together. Unlike the sound effects, each recurring music track has a unique version for each world. So for example, in the Rainy World 3, the pizzicato strings were processed to make them sound more raindrop-like. With the addition of alternative versions that will play according to game states in some levels, the 11 original tracks have become 35 tracks in the remastered version.
We had this already.
During the process, Thekla managed to acquire stems for since its original tracks, which provided a lot of opportunities in remastering and remixing. Like originally, I didn't want to do any replacement, but we really early on discovered that it was really needed, just in the opening of the game where you have the city soundscape. I think that was the first time the discussion came up, because in the original game it's just like a noise sweep, and I was doing a lot of work processing that and making it sound more enveloping and stuff. But your approach was to redo it entirely, doing a real cityscape, and
still with the Braid vibe.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully.
So did you have the original sound available when you worked on this kind of soundscape? Did you compare with that, or did you just make something you thought fit?
I think, we had all the original sound effects in a giant folder, so we had access to all sound effects and basically could just replace them one by one with something more HD. So yes, we had access to everything, but in this case I think we just went totally away from that.
Yeah, we definitely did, but at the same time then I think generally avoiding stuff like hearing a very clear sound, like a car horn or something like too much in your face. It would still be abstract in a way, or not too tangible, I guess. Which of course the original sound isn't, because it's just like a noise sweep.
So that's one. Yeah, that's the least tangible sound, I guess. You can imagine.
Now onto another puzzle. Scaffolding. Interesting. We need to go get the key. No, I could get the key. I've got a game plan. I had to like rewind in my head there. So like to the left there's the second part. This is the first part. And then this is the second part. Doesn't work if you die too fast. First time. First fucking time. Figured it out before without even playing it backwards or forwards. That's cool. Quite enjoyed that. Right, that's all music done as well. Was there any more down below? Let's check. I don't think that was a route further to right there. Cool. Alright, let's fill in this puzzle. I still think we got at least one more. I swear we still have like 2 left after we do all this. 3 left even. I don't think I need to be there. So I'm basically just finishing up for the night now. I just want to see where these puzzles were. I might like decide to come back to it later. This area was a bit suspicious. We didn't get that room in the end. Oh, we used the thing to block the door, right? We can't do that. room 2. There's one of the puzzle pieces. Okay, I think I have no idea of how to get that one. Cool. Extreme security. We've got 2 keys. We're gonna have 2 doors, right? Or multiple doors. And they're gonna be green door, normal door, green door, normal door, or something like that. Let's check first. Oh, yep, we got a lot of doors. 4 green, 1 normal, 2 green, 1 normal. And there's 2 of the pieces. And we got these Goombas. Alright, let's see if we get this. So because it's a normal green door, I was going by like my theory earlier, then a normal key should suffice. We got to do the opposite. And we do 1 door, rewind, 2nd door, rewind. And now we swap keys. Cool. Now that keys. Ah, fuck. Ah, fucked up. Don't rewind. Ah, I have to start again. Damn it, that would have been done first time. Alright, normal key first. Alright. And then this key we should be able to get through the 2 green doors, but that last door, I have to sacrifice this key to get through the last door. Cool. I want that piece back. Oh. I can't get back over. Cool. Oh, is that the only two? Oh, I swear there's another secret. Oh. Well, let's try and see if we can get another secret. What? How did I do it before? Why am I having a problem this time around? I know what a puzzle is. I was meant to return the key. That's where the problem was. Yeah. So, a bit of a technique here. Good enough. We'll see if there's anything else up here. I'll go wait for a sound cue. Huh. I don't think there's anything up here. Huh. So hard to time it. Yeah, I know. Leave that. How many more do we got? 2 more. Cool. We've got 1 more puzzle left to do. Was there a room in this one? Oh, I haven't read this one. Why haven't I read these? Must have forgot. Thinking about the way time works in the world.
I actually don't have that much to say about World 1. I love, of course, the fact that it's World 1 and that the numbering goes backwards. That's a nice hint. You can read the text in the other direction if you want, and the flowers are closing instead of opening. I love how the music plays backwards, and you have to do 3 increasingly tricky things about riding backwards monsters. It's fun to think a little bit about the logic of, like, well, wait, what is the monster's actual past? The monsters have 2 pasts that merge into the same present and future. One of them is falling from the cannon, and the other is jumping down from the door, and your bonking them merges those 2 pasts into the future, which is pretty wild, right? When we think about the multiverse, we're always thinking about the present splitting into 2 futures. There's a rather mysterious thing in an advanced area of mathematics called a co-multiplication, where instead of taking 2 things, combining them and producing 1, you're taking 1 and splitting it into 2.
The idea behind the whole world was to do time being bidirectional in some way, right? This is one of the ideas that was left over from the original game that I decided to bring in the end. How do we do that there actually are 2 directions that time is going simultaneously and you could see it either way, right? And
To
so
really
that,
take that seriously,
yeah, and
as
so
opposed to like it's forward plus tweaks.
yes. So the monsters are living backwards in some way and the player is playing forward. Now, because it's a video game made for you, you do have a little bit of like executive privilege here in that you're able to change their past and they're not able to change your past, because what would that mean, right? But the only other way that I thought about that this could possibly work, maybe I wasn't imaginative enough, but you could just imagine that both things are happening and they kind of just don't affect each other. But that's not very interesting, right? And so if you're going to affect the other direction of time, how does that work? And this is what I came up with for that.
We could simply be observers in a multiplayer video game played by the trolls,
Yeah.
going in the other direction, in which there is one really horrific enemy called Tim, but no, backwards, we're like a super friend who's always like resurrecting them and debunking them.
Could be.
And, wow.
Could be.
Okay, well, this makes it more easier to solve the puzzle. I don't know why I didn't do this last room. I must have ended this session before doing this room and just forgot to go back. The known laws of physics are pretty bidirectional.
Let's talk about the physics thing for a little bit that motivated this, which is, you know, there's this interesting thing about physical laws that they all appear to be valid bidirectionally, even going back to Newton's laws.
Right, at least the microscopic ones.
Yeah, and then even, you know, when you get to, you know, quantum mechanics and quantum field theory and all this stuff, it gets a little more complicated, but there's this thing called CPT invariance.
Right.
Where you flip selected combinatorics of charge parity in time, and you get a valid system running in reverse, right? So that was just the inspiration for this whole world, was just like, what if we take that seriously? Because a game is a running system, it's a little universe, right? And it's not nearly as sophisticated or interesting as the actual universe, but we can use that. Because it's simpler, we can like focus, and then there's a certain kind of magic that we can do where you do something in the game that is not really possible in the real world, but it seems almost like it would be.
Right.
And we do a little bit of that in Witness too, right? But in this game, it's like, let's take that law of physics a little bit seriously, and how do we make it actually work? How do we give you that experience that forward and backward in time are equally valid and create 2 equally valid perspectives, right? Like if I were living the opposite direction in time, everything would make sense to me. If I were some kind of creature for which entropy
Right.
appearing the reverse of what looks sensical to us made sense, right?
Yeah, in the morning you would unscramble an egg for breakfast, or well,
Yes.
you would eat the breakfast and then unscramble the egg.
You
Or
would
well,
uneat the
actually, yeah, that would, this could get horrible if we follow it up.
Yeah.
I mean, I also love the background art here. We see these kind of steam vents or little volcanoes or whatever they are, with the smoke being drawn down into them. That's really cool.
Which, of course, when you rewind, they appear
Absolutely.
the normal direction. And some things you can't really tell. So, like the little lightnings and stuff, it's like, oh, are those going forward or backward? And it doesn't matter.
I mean, I guess you could imagine some weird mechanics where, like, you have a move now which consists of unfalling from a platform. But I don't know how that would work. Because, if it were really reverse time, you'd press the key after you unfell back up to the platform.
Yeah, I thought about that kind of stuff, and I couldn't come up with anything.
Yeah.
Cool. That's that one done. Oh yeah, I think I know how to solve the puzzle now. Let's just take a look at if there's anything else up here. Eventually this rocket will go further ahead. Oof. Ah. Yeah, and then it will give me an opportunity to go across. I suppose I play the waiting game. Shouldn't be too long. I suppose I could go and take a look. Yeah, it's going through fast enough. That's a cool puzzle, I like that. Ah. Still need to get around. Can't reverse time to get back up. I think I'll be a time spare. How this works? Yeah. What's this? The hardest puzzle in the game. Interesting.
I think for a lot of people, this is their single favorite puzzle in the game. I was playing with this
with some people complain about it because it's hard.
Well, they're
it's
wrong.
probably the hardest puzzle in the game, right? There is a platform. It's really high. It's like
we've
twice
done
jump
this already.
height or something.
Right.
And it's really far. It's so far from anything else that you clearly can't jump across either. You have this question, like, what even am I expected to do here, right?
Right.
And in the initial configuration of the level, the monster doesn't even come over here yet. So there's like nothing if you just
Right.
walk over here from level load.
So yeah, there's the platform puzzle farther to the left with the shadow platform to get him over here.
Yeah.
But honestly, it didn't take me that long to figure this one out because it's presented to you in such a stark way. Now, you've seen other places in the game where you have to do some kind of double jump to get to higher places. Sometimes that means jumping off two monsters. We saw that sometimes with a little air control and execution, we can jump off one monster twice. Oh, but there's our double.
It's just interesting to see as a designer how, some people find certain things hard and other things easy. There's not really a uniform, this is easy, this is hard. But this puzzle is, broadly speaking, one of the harder ones.
There's two interesting things about this, I think. One is that in a lot of other places in the game, when there's tricky timing, like way back in Leap of Faith, you're like, oh, but I can rewind and adjust the timing. Well, but now rewind is a resource that you're using because you have to set up the shadow. But I think the other nice thing about this is once you have that idea, you think, oh my god, that's so acrobatic. How am I going to get that right? And it takes a couple tries, but it's actually not that hard to get right. The execution is not that hard, but then you're so proud of yourself as a player when you pull it off.
Cool. That's everything in this area done, I believe. That was some crisp more. I mean, it's like all pieces. That wasn't a piece. Fuck. It's just more information. Is in visuals where the last piece was then. Yeah, I need to get out. This is what I looked into, tried messing around with last episode. This is going to be tricky, I believe. I think I know what a solution might be. The general gist is again the Goomba all the way across to the left. Actually, let me. This is actually lined up to make the Goomba bounce 3 times. Originally I thought I need the rabbits to get them up. The Goomba across. But, like further back here. But maybe I don't. Maybe those rabbits are just for that area. So generally, basically there's a Goomba here. And I need to get them onto the far left. Let's just start a bit and see how it plays out. Don't want to kill him. Alright, we gotta get him on the bridge later. Yeah, but then how does he get up here? No, we can get him on the second one. Okay, like that. Oh, okay, this actually might be easier than the first one. No, too late. Cool. Yeah, actually, this might work. This should have been already down. Nope. I think I could do this now actually. I'll have that down. Let's set up all the other stuff as well. Then you can bounce off the 3 rabbits. This is a hell lot easier than I expected. I need one of those gates open and the other one closed. Do you want to topple down? Ah. We can then have him up there and ready for a time into a walk. Can you just casually walk through here? And then he's down here, he's safe. Yeah. Alright. Keep this lift down. What's the other switch for? Oh, that's to bring the lift back down if it's up, right? We want this one closed and this one open. We don't activate these three, yeah? Oh, it was always down. Okay, we have that kept down. Yeah, this might be doable. Alright, cool, let's do it. Nope. Alright. First time? Nope, not first time. Cool. Second part down. Motherfucker. Good enough. Do I follow him? I can always rewind if I'm slow. Cool. Come on. Oh. We'll do every time and see. Maybe there'll be a window that'll be good. Next window. Man. Can we rate another window? That's just way too fiddly for my liking. How's that? No. I'll do another bout. Then have a couple more rotations. Maybe this one? Yeah, okay, cool. That's good, that's good. Alright, he's up there, he's safe. Now I think the switch down there brings it back down. No. Ah. Cool. This is the best we're going to get, presumably. No. Okay, that's a really good one. Not good enough. Next one. Did I rewind too far back? I think I did. Yeah, is he free? He's free. Good, good, good. Ah, that's a fun puzzle. Oh, motherfucker. It's not even over yet. Alright, do it via ladder. Cool. Yay, done it. That was a really cool puzzle, I like that. The last one, blockade. Go easy on me, please. Do we have this? Oh. Alright. I feel like I'd be here a bit. I want to call it. But I'll leave it at that for now. I feel like I'll be on that puzzle for a while. Right, let's get on to big screen. Yeah. So with that puzzle, I'm just going to leave that for next session, which is Tuesday. No, I think I'm working Tuesday. Yeah, I think I'm working Tuesday, so I won't be available next Tuesday. But next Thursday I'll be available. That'll be another 2-hour stream. I need to double check and get back to you when I'm streaming. There's a possibility I might be streaming Tuesday, but I doubt it. Keep an eye on my schedule on my Twitch. I'll let you know if I'm streaming or not. So yeah, thank you everyone watching. I feel like I've pretty much done Braid now. I've done I think every dialogue commentary section. It's just one more puzzle piece I have to get. I'll probably go over the whole all the areas again, make sure there's no secrets I'm missing out and stuff. So definitely I'm pretty sure one more stream and I'm done. Probably even less than a stream's worth. Depending how long this puzzle takes to do actually. So yeah, so if you're watching me on YouTube, feel free to come over to my Twitch and watch my stuff there. And if you're watching me on Twitch, if you want to see the backlog, you can head over to my YouTube videos, my past stuff that's in the bio, my bio. Yeah, so thank you everyone for watching, and yeah, I'll see you next week. Bye.